Welcome back to Tech Ops. I'm Greg. I'm with Eric again. This episode is sponsored by the Kommando store, the friendly online military surplus store. They have a rotating stock of clothing, gear, and equipment from around the world, updated every few weeks. This month's featured product is a South African waxi boot. I think that's how you pronounce that. W-A-X-I. They're iconic boots from the Cold War from South Africa. You can check that out along with much more at the kommandostore.com, Kommando with a K. Also, if you are a first-time purchaser, you'll get 5% off with our coupon code TACOPS. That is all lowercase, no space, TACOPS, kommandostore.com. All right, today we are joined by Vincent Aiello. Did I pronounce that right?
Normally it's Aiello, but that's fine. Yeah, close enough.
Aiello. Okay, thanks. So you are a naval pilot, or were a naval pilot?
I was, yes, for almost 25 years.
That is incredible. I've been really, ever since I heard about you, I've been excited to get you on here and ask you a few questions. So thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here.
So do you want to maybe start out just kind of going through a little bit of history? Maybe why you joined the Navy, what motivated you to, a little bit about school or any tours you went on?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, California, and my mother and father divorced when I was very young, and my mother remarried. And my stepfather took us to an air show in 1978. I was 8 years old, and he enjoyed air shows because of the technical parts of it. He's now an engineer. And I went, and I was just mesmerized by the speed and the sound of the aircraft, the swagger of the pilots, the environment there. And I just was hooked at a young age. And in high school, I thought maybe that's what I want to do, with the help of my stepdad, who motivated me to make the effort to do it. And so I applied to the Naval Academy. They said, thanks, but no thanks. We've got plenty of more impressive candidates than you to choose from. So I made my way into the Navy's ROTC program, which offers you some help with tuition and then a commission at the end. You have to sit through the classes and all. And I was commissioned after receiving a bachelor's degree in math from UCLA in 1992 and was commissioned to the Navy. I was accepted into the flight program. In the flight program, I did sufficiently well to be selected for jet aircraft. And in jets, again, was good enough to be selected for F-18s. And I spent about the next 25 years flying almost nonstop, with the exception of one tour. Accrued over 3,800 hours, over 700 carrier-arrested landings, deployed 5 times on different carriers all around the world, and one more time on the ground in Afghanistan, not flying. And I retired in early 2017, and now I fly for the airlines. I did have one chance to fly the F-16 towards the end of my tour, ended up accruing about 170 hours as an adversary in Fallon, Nevada, just east of Reno.
Wow, that's incredible. Over 3,000 hours, you said?
Over 3,800 total, yeah. Over 3,000 in just the F-18 alone.
Wow. So you said you flew the F-16 as well. Is there one you prefer more over the other, or does each one just serve a different role?
Really the latter. I would say if a family has 2 cars, there might be one they enjoy driving, but it's not practical to go to Home Depot or to get the groceries. So the F-18 was my first aircraft, and I knew it so well from all the times that I deployed in it and flew it and had emergencies and fought in it and everything else, that if you were to ask me which one, if I had to go back, I would want to go fly, that would be the one. But by the time I was allowed to and afforded the opportunity to fly the F-16, it was new and different, and it fought differently. It flew differently. It had one engine, so we spent a lot of time working on what happens if you lose your one and only engine. And so it was novel and fresh, and for that reason, I really enjoyed it. Plus, you laid back a little further than you do in the F-18. It had a side stick instead of the center stick. So I really enjoyed it. I just never got to the point where I accrued enough hours to be proficient in it to a point where I really felt truly comfortable. Believe it or not, even after 170 hours, you still feel like there's something new. And truthfully, even in the F-18, there's always something new. But you'd seen a lot after 20 some odd years flying the F-18. And after just 2 years of flying the F-16, I just felt like there was always something new, and it wasn't quite as comfortable just based on the lack of experience compared to the others. So I would say the F-18 was more of my favorite in that regard.
Awesome. So it was an interesting thing you just said about the F-16 cockpit. You said it was a little bit smaller.
It's about the same size, but what happens is the seat leans back a little bit more, and instead of the control stick between your legs, it's over to the right outside of your right thigh, and so it's just a different sitting position, like two different Easy Boy chairs in your living room. Let's say the F-18 you sit a little more upright, arguably a little less comfortable, and the F-16 you lean back a little bit more, and again where your arms are is a little bit more comfortable. So, yeah.
I went down to that Air Force Museum. I think it was in Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah.
And that's probably the closest I'll ever come to actually getting an F-16, unfortunately. But they have a cockpit there of an F-16. And I'm a pretty tall guy. I'm 6'2", so it felt real small. But yeah, that's the one thing I noticed. I was laying way back.
Yeah. Well,
reclined
if you ever get a chance to jump in the flight deck of a A4 Skyhawk, well, then you'll barely fit into that thing because, if you sit and put your arm around somebody, you can do that in an A4 and your arms will be hanging outside the cockpit. So it is definitely a much smaller cockpit than either the F-18 or the F-16. But there's not a lot of those flying anymore, with the exception of a couple commercial air squadrons.
Right. So I think I've heard, there are limits on height and weight to be a pilot?
Yes, and we had on my show, which I don't know if we'll get a chance to talk about, but we had an aviation physiologist come on and talk about a little bit of that. And then it came up again recently in one of the listener questions, I fielded, and I don't recall the exact limits right now, but I want to say, 6'4"-ish is kind of the maximum height. Of course, there are weight limits for both the maximum and the minimum, as well as height limits for the minimum. And it's really the anthropometric, I always get that wrong, but it's basically the measure from, say, your elbow to your wrist, or from your hip to your knee, and all these different things, because ejection seats in fighter aircraft are built for the center of the bell curve. And what I mean by that is most people fit within a certain structure and features. Not everybody, surely, we are all unique, but to keep it simple, they say, well, hey, look, everyone who is this high and weighs this much and it's this long from their elbow to their fingers, or from their shoulder to their, waist, well, they will all fit in this aircraft, and the ejection seat will work if they need it. And so if you're outside of the norm, outside of the bell curve, if you will, well, then unfortunately, it's not necessarily equal opportunity in that regard.
Interesting. So I guess we could talk about, have you ever tried DCS? Have you ever played that game?
I have. I have tried it once when I recorded with Matt Wagner of Eagle Dynamics at his home in Phoenix.
Okay, yeah.
And we made a episode of that on my show, the Fighter Pilot Podcast.
Oh, that's right. We'll get to that eventually, but I did forget to mention that in the beginning.
That's okay.
He does run a show called the Fighter Pilot Podcast. It's a really incredible podcast for anyone who wants to check that out. We'll get into that later on, though. But again, that's probably the closest I'll ever come to actually getting an FA-18, at least, is I just recently got the FA-18 Hornet module for DCS. In terms of realism, how would you rank that? I mean, I'm sure it's a lot more realistic than, I don't know if you ever played Ace Combat or any of those other games where you're carrying around 50 missiles. But
I remember playing various video games when I was younger, and a lot of them were just pure entertainment. I'm thinking back to I think it was a Top Gun little game. It was like an 8-bit type of thing where you'd fight and then you'd try to land on the carrier, and it was so archaic. If you pushed like the up arrow one time too many as you were trying to land, it would crash every time, kind of thing. So, they have definitely come a long way. I don't normally play now just because there's really no time in my life for it, with 3 active boys here in the home and 2 careers. And, my wife works as well. So there's not a lot of time for it, although our listeners do play quite a bit, and so we are doing more with that community for our podcast. But in the opportunity I had to experience it with Matt Wagner in Phoenix, I was visually, I will say, very amazed at how close to real it was. And I mean everything from just the way the surfaces of the DDIs looked in certain areas of light when the sun is hitting it a certain way, the smudges on the different parts of the aircraft, the way when you look around, it just really felt authentic, and I was impressed by that. As far as the inner ear goes, and what I mean by that, of course, is when you're flying, your body is put through all the kinematics of movement through space. And so, of course, none of that was accurate. Right. So there was a disconnect for that, which is unfortunate, but that's just the way it goes. And then tactile, of course, I believe Matt was using the Thrustmaster, which is very good for a gaming system, but I found it lacked a little bit of the feel of the real F-18. And what I mean by that is at certain angles of attack, which is simply the difference between the nose of the aircraft and the relative wind. So if you think about a car driving down the road, it's at 0 degrees angle of attack. And now you think about a motorcycle going down the road, popping a wheelie, he might be at 30 or 45 degrees angle of attack. So at any rate, in the F-18, when you get to certain angles of attack, the flight control system will provide some artificial feel like resistance in the stick, and it becomes a tactile way to understand where you are in relation to that particular flight parameter. And lacking that, I was a little bit confused, and what I mean by that is I'm used to the muscle memory of having that. So as I was using both I forget what we called it, but one was a virtual and the other was like an IR tracker for the head thing I was wearing.
Okay, yeah.
Yep. You guys all understand this better than I do. But as I was looking over my shoulder to try to defeat this pesky little MiG-21, which in real life should be no problem at all, I found I was pulling and thinking, okay, I don't feel anything, so I'm guessing at about this airspeed or this angle of attack, and I'd look in and I was way off parameters. So for me, it lacked a little bit of that realism. But I understand there's only so much you can do with a PC setup in a person's living room. So other than those, I understand that the missions are very detailed. The F-18 program is very realistic. And in fact, I am helping Matt now, even in a consulting type of venue, to make it even better. And so it's as close as you can get without doing the real thing is what I would say.
Right. I can imagine like you can't replicate the G's that you pull in a simulator on the computer as much. There's definitely a lot that you wouldn't be able to duplicate. So you flew the original Hornet, right? You did not fly the Super Hornet.
I flew all A through F of the Hornet and Super Hornet.
Oh, you did? Okay. Okay, and then you also flew the F-16. I heard you mention one time in your thing that you were a Top Gun instructor in your podcast.
Yes. From 2000 to late 2002, I was on the staff of the Navy Fighter Weapons School, better known as Top Gun, located in Fallon, Nevada.
So I've got to ask, what was your call sign?
Well, my call sign was the same all throughout my career, and it's Jell-O, like the food, and it's basically because it rhymes with Aiello. Everyone enjoyed saying, hello, Jell-O, Aiello.
All right.
So, yeah.
It's pretty easy, pretty straightforward.
Yep.
I've heard there's some pretty interesting stories behind some of the call signs. So
there are. In fact, we have an entire episode devoted to that. So if your listeners are interested, when we get to that, it's episode 2. But I don't want to steal them away from your show. But if they're interested, they can come hear all about the origins of call signs and how we get them and what they mean and a couple good examples.
All right. So the first time I heard about you was on a UFO podcast of all things. So I was actually looking up a video of Tyler Rogaway. He's an author. He writes on different military topics for The Drive, The War Zone. He's a real interesting guy, real smart guy. But he was also on that podcast. That's actually how I came across you. So do you have an interest in these things, or what led you to end up going on that show?
First off, let me echo your sentiment on Tyler. The information that I see coming from him is amazing. And I need to reach out because, yes, we were on that show together, so we briefly met virtually, and it would be great to team up with him to do some various initiatives since we're sort of in the same space. So my interest in that is that I had an episode on my show about UFOs because in 2004, on the USS Nimitz, which is an aircraft carrier, off the coast of Mexico, which was just south of San Diego, where we were doing some exercises before deployment, a friend of mine, Dave Fravor, had an incident with something that they could not identify. Now, I was on the ship that day. I was not on that particular mission. I don't remember that much talk about it, and I don't remember seeing anything myself, and I'm sure I would remember it if I did, but they returned from their flight, there was some discussion about it. Their tapes were kind of whisked away, and he kept a copy for himself, and then it ended up getting overwritten because we carry tapes on our flight so that we can record the mission and come back and debrief it. And they tried to keep a copy and ended up getting overwritten, which is unfortunate. And for whatever reason, it got sat on for the longest time. And then all of a sudden, about a year ago now, 2018 or so, someone reached out to him and said, hey, we uncovered this report, and it ended up getting more press. And so because it was fairly on everyone's minds, I reached out and I said, hey, buddy, are you interested in coming on the show? Because you've been asked for by name. And he said, sure. So I live in San Diego. He lives in southern New Hampshire. I had a layover in Boston anyway. I'm an airline pilot now. And I rented a car and drove up and put a microphone in front of his face. We got caught up on old times because we're friends. And he told the story, which I had not really heard in that context before. And we sat and deliberated a little bit on what we thought it could have been. And we basically ended up by saying, I don't know, and he still doesn't know, and he doesn't really like the notoriety for it, but he's received plenty. And so I published that episode in early January of 2019, and people all thought it was great, a lot of them, and reached out to me and said, hey, you should go investigate this other one, and you should talk about this, and hey, do you want to come on my show? And for the first two things, I basically said thanks, but no thanks. There was an episode because it's been asked for and it involved fighter jets, which is the theme of my podcast. And for the last point, when a gentleman invited me on, I want to say his name was Jim. I'd forgotten already, which is unfortunate. But he said, hey, will you come on and talk about your interview with him and anything else you might have seen, much like you guys did, Greg and Eric? I said, sure, I'll come on your show. Why not? And so we talked about it, and Tyler showed up, and I shot him straight. I said, look, I don't know what he saw. I'm not ready to second guess him because he's an adult, a highly trained one and a smart one. So he doesn't know what he saw. I'm only reporting what I heard, and that's about the extent of it.
Interesting. So that was it was in 2004. Was that that Tic Tac known as a Tic Tac UFO? Okay.
Yes, it was. Mm-hmm.
Did you hear that? I remember hearing some people were saying that was just a party balloon. So I'll put the pictures on if you're watching on YouTube right now, but they were saying it kind of looked like a balloon, like a big number 1 for, if you have like someone turned 15 or something, you have a 1 and a 5 in the shape of a balloon.
Right.
And it lifted off, and they showed it from a different angle. It almost looked exactly like that. What do you make of that?
I've not heard that before, but the only thing I would say is if you listen to Commander Fravor's story, he talks about at some point as he is redefining his maneuver against this thing, that it accelerated like nothing he's ever seen before and disappeared. So I don't anticipate a balloon doing that unless it is popping and maybe there was a visual illusion. Again, I'm not here to say that what he saw was from outer space or super top secret. Right. I don't know what he saw, but I do know that he said, according to him, that it accelerated away at a great rate of speed.
And that was the one that was captured on that AT or the AT FLIR?
Well, so that's an interesting point because in my naivete, I did not realize there was another incident off the coast of Florida years later, something like 2014 or 15. And so when I found, just with a quick Google search, some online video and pictures and audio that I used in the production of that episode, lo and behold, I found that I was mixing the two incidents, and people were clarifying that for me, and I had no idea. So there's more than evidently one incident of this. In fact, just recently, we're recording this in early May 2019, and I want to say a week or two ago, late April, there was something about in the news that junior officers in the Navy were trying to get higher ranking officers in the Navy to quit, squashing them to say, look, we want to be able to say what we saw. And so I don't know what people think they want to report, but I will tell you in my 25 years and almost 4,000 hours of flying, I never saw anything that I could not identify.
So am I actually mixing those up too? Was the AT-FLIR footage from the Florida incident?
That's possible because it sounds to me like all the video that Commander Fravor and his squadron had, VFA 41 from 2004, is no longer available. Now, that may not be true, but that's what I think I heard.
Okay, so that might be the party balloon one that I'm talking about.
So while you were in you said you were for over 20 years, did you ever hear anybody else talk about stuff like that? I know you had mentioned that, people wanted to tell their stories, but, Did you ever hear any other like detailed stories like that would, help push this or what?
Not that I recall, no. And in fact, I hadn't even, like I said, I was on the ship that day in November 2004. And later, as this started coming out in 2018, it was one of those things where I was like, yeah, I kind of remember something. Because, in our line of work, if people don't understand something, what do? They tease you about it, or they pick on you, or they make light of it. It's, this big type A masculine environment where if we don't understand it, let's just make fun of it. And so when he got back, he told his story, and, the next day there was something on the air plan, which is just the giant flight schedule for the whole ship. And on the back, there's always these notes. And of course, there's a little extra white space. So they'll put a little cartoon picking on somebody. And so for a couple of days, they had some fun with it. They talked about, hey, the men in black are going to show up and flashy thing you or whatever. And so again, I vaguely remember that 14 years, 15 years later, whatever it's been. But even that, as much press as it's garnered, was kind of far from my mind. So I don't remember any other episodes besides that. That doesn't mean I wasn't exposed to it. I am not a steel trap memory type of person. I have people tell me all the time of things we were doing when we were younger, and I scratch my head and it's like, are you sure that was me? So no, I don't remember any other incidents besides that.
Interesting. I find UFOs fascinating because, obviously because the prospect of there being alien life, but I'm highly skeptical. All the cases, I think most of them can be explained, but you want to believe, kind of like the X-Files, the famous X-Files line. Unfortunately, I just haven't found anything pointing to that. They all seem to be some blurry picture or something. It could be anything. Even with that the Tic Tac event, it's just never. You never have like real clear definitive evidence one way or the other. It's always something kind of blurry or someone's story. I'm not saying that your buddy there was making it up or anything. It's just always like third hand or something.
Right.
They never come down in the middle of Times Square, walk down the ramp and say,
exactly.
Here we are.
Greg, mankind's quest for understanding and enlightenment has existed since we have. And so it's perfectly normal for you to say that and everybody else. And it's perfectly normal to be skeptical because we feel like we have such good control of everything else, with the exception of perhaps religion. But as far as explaining even how reproduction works, or metamorphosis, or how a piece of wood can turn into a piece of stone over so many thousands of years in the right conditions, we can point to a lot of things. And that's part of what I think helps propel our species, is we want to be able to understand. And so I think it's very natural to apply that to this as well. And there are a lot of things. In my case, look, I know that somebody out there understands quantum physics. I don't. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So,
Well, you said you were a math major, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's not quite physics, but...
No, that got me to where I needed to go, which was flight school, and that's about the end of it. I am not a member of Mensa by any stretch. So, but, again, someone may understand something, someone else doesn't. In this case, I don't know what it is, and I'm not sure what to believe.
But it's an interesting one, though. It was
For
interesting.
sure.
Yeah, that made a lot of waves. What was that, about a year ago now?
Right.
I think it was last summer. Yeah.
Well, when it started getting new press, and again, the event was 2004.
Right, yeah. All right, maybe we can move on to another topic. Now, this would have came obviously after, but what are your thoughts on the F-35?
From what I understand about it, which is all in the 2.5, 3 years since I've retired, is that it is a very capable, impressive aircraft. When I was in the Navy, active duty, it was coming, and there were certain briefs that I had, and then several others that were much more extensive that I just never went through because I always felt like, I'll be gone soon and it's not going to matter. And so I don't know as much about it as many of my contemporaries do, including, well, clearly the people flying it, but even a lot of people who are in but not flying it, they've been exposed to it because you need to know, if you're on the offense, you need to know what the defense is doing. So everybody's familiar with the other capabilities. And so from what I understand, it is a very impressive aircraft with amazing what they call sensor fusion, meaning in the old days, we simply had a radar, and if you were lucky, maybe a different kind of sensor to build situational awareness of what's out there. And it sounds to me like they have systems now, and I don't know what they are. And even if I did, I probably couldn't say so. But it sounds like they are tying so many things in that you just have this global awareness of everything going on around you, and you can convey that to others that aren't so fortunate and call the shots. And so it sounds like an impressive program. Is it expensive? Yes, no doubt about it. Was it mired in setbacks and overruns, and we built the thing in 47 states out of 50 so that it wouldn't get canceled because no congressman wants to cancel it? Whatever. I mean, there might have been some posturing, but it's a good aircraft, and the fact that so many countries are buying it and it's coming out and really impressing folks that know well enough to understand that, that's good enough for me. And so I take it on faith, but I don't know anything more than what the general public knows.
Right. Okay. You always hear that they have to sacrifice some stuff. For example, it's not quite as maneuverable, or maybe it is more maneuverable than the fourth generation, the F-15, FA-18, but not as maneuverable as it might have been if it wasn't stealth. Does it seem like that trade-off is worth it? Or for example, being able to carry as many weapons? What do you make of those?
Well, it's hard for me to make an assessment without knowing all the facts, because at some point you have a team of engineers and a team of, I would hope, pilots, but someone who knows what's needed, and the two of them have to hash it out. And if it's a question of it can be this maneuverable, but it can't carry this many weapons or this much fuel, then there will be a trade-off. And my co-host and I talk on our show all the time about the trade-offs that aircraft go through. And the more I've thought about this recently, really, almost everything in life is a trade-off. I mean, what you eat is a trade-off. The people you marry, the having children or not, if you have a pet, right, your ability to up and go somewhere is all of a sudden a trade-off. Every time we want to go somewhere, we got to take care of our dog and a couple of cats. So I think it's hard for anyone else to make an assessment, although, frankly, the media is happy to make assessments on everything these days and without all the facts and sell it to us as if they're the authorities. And I have my own opinions on that. You could probably figure it out. But it's not really for me to say, because the aircraft was designed to be in a role not like the F-22. So I don't think it's a fair comparison to the F-22. The F-22 is older, but it's more maneuverable. It is more like, as I understand it, the dogfighting, fifth generation F-16, where it's very good in the knife fight, and it's quite good, as I understand, also in situational awareness and detecting threats and being stealthy. But apparently it's not quite as good as the F-35. And so there's some trade-offs there. And from what I understand from a pilot who flies the F-35, they don't need, ideally, to be super highly maneuverable and do the kinds of things that you see an F-22 do at an air show, because it shouldn't be in that situation. Now, that being said, they said the same thing in the mid-'60s and didn't put a gun on the F-4 Phantom II. And look what that did to us in Vietnam. And that is why I was able to go teach at a school called Top Gun, because that came around due to our poor performance in the first part of that conflict. And so it might be a little naive on my part to drink the Kool-Aid everyone else is, to say, look, in a pure threat battle, let's say with someone like China or Russia, that we won't get to a phone booth type fight, as we call a dogfight, where you've got literally, if you've seen movies like Saving Private Ryan, towards the end, they're throwing their helmets and their empty guns at each other and clawing and kicking. I mean, anything you can. And a dogfight can be very much the same way. You get in that very close space, you spiral down to the ground, you call frantically for your buddies to come save you, because that's really a dangerous place to be. And if an F-35 gets there, I'm not sure how it'll do, but ideally it doesn't get there.
So with the stealth, I know a lot of time what they say is it's supposed to not get into a dogfight. It's supposed to be able to be far, stay stealthy, stay hidden, and be able to shoot their targets from a distance and leave. Do you think, like you were bringing up, that they said the dogfight was over? The dogfight was over with longer and longer range missiles. Do you think that is going to be happening? Do you think that's realistic for the future then, for the F-35 to rely on something like that?
I think it is realistic, but I also think we have to be cautious, because everybody understands from the history of warfare that every time you come up with something, there is a counter to it. And it goes all the way back to swords and plate mail armor, right? So, then you had bows and arrows, and maybe you had shields or distance. And so there's always going to be a response and a counter response. And you don't know how things are going to work until you get into the arena and start throwing punches. So True. There is electronic attack. There are systems now that can detect in different ways. There are space-based systems. There's so much going on. And even just the standard person on the ground who looks up and says, or maybe who is, living in the other country's neighborhood right by the base and simply gets on the internet or the telephone and says, hey, I just saw a B-2 take off, right? I mean, you've got situations there that you can't control. And so is it foolproof? Absolutely not. Is it going to be pretty good? I think so. And so until something else is invented and then there's a discovery of that, then, it will have the advantage for now, but no one ever knows that for sure. And I think it's difficult to say how well it will do until the balloon goes up, as the expression goes.
Interesting. So you brought up different counters going back and forth. One pretty popular out there that I feel like the U.S. hasn't really developed as much as other countries is that IRST, or IRST, the infrared search and track. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, we see it on like all the Russian jets, even the new Chinese jets are having them. It seems like the U.S. really hasn't done much with IRST.
Yeah, when I was at Top Gun, one of my areas of subject matter expertise was threat aircraft, and I studied at the time the MiG-29 Fulcrum and the Su-27 Flanker, and both of those had them even when I was on the staff back in 2000 and had for several years. And I remember the capability being, limiting. In other words, it was a nice to have in certain situations, but it wasn't a game changer. Now, there were certain counter tactics that we had to keep in mind as a result of the IRST, but it wasn't like, whereas before it was two knights battling with, broadswords that suddenly archers come along and kill us at a distance and we never get a chance to use our sword. So I don't know. I think the reason we didn't do it right away is, at least this is faith on my part. It might be misguided. You can tell me. But someone looked at the idea early on, I'm sure, and said, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. We could do this, but it's not going to be that good. The fact that it has come around later suggests to me that the technology improved to a point where they said, you know what, if we put this in and it can do this now with our better processing and technology and everything else, look what we can do. We can be stealthy and not emit because it's passive, or we can do this, or we can tie it in, or we can have an identification system. I mean, even the F-14 had the TCS, the television camera system, I think it was. I mean, it's not really infrared, but it allowed them to theoretically have a visual identification at a longer range than just their eyeballs. And so the fact that you're starting to see it now, and there is a modification that adapts it to the front end of a fuel tank on the Super Hornet, where you lose some of the fuel, you just cut the first third of it off and slap on this IRST pod, and I think they take away your ability to jettison it because it's too expensive.
That's what I was gonna ask you next. Yep. Yeah, it's probably not expendable anymore.
No, I remember them talking about that as I was getting out, and I said, well, good luck with that. But I also understand that the F-22 and the F-35 have different systems that I'm not aware of, but that lead me to believe there are different things that are all tied together to go back to what I was saying earlier, that feed into the overall situational awareness for the pilot. And if infrared is one of those, or maybe laser or something else, hey, good on them if it works. But I don't take too much from the fact that the Russians designed it into their aircraft in the 80s and we did not.
Okay. Yeah, so if anyone doesn't know, that's pretty much a different way of tracking or detecting and tracking different targets, aircraft, instead of using radar. You're using infrared instead, which doesn't emit, the benefit of it doesn't emit any signal, so that your target is not going to know that you are looking at it, unlike radar. Right.
Hey, and if I could add to that, we have used, of course, infrared pods. Anyone who's watched any even footage from Desert Storm knows that we have laser-guided bombs that we can guide through an infrared system because you don't require visual light. It works in a different spectrum, or part of the spectrum, I should say. And so we use them. In fact, those pods on the F-18 can be used in air-to-air mode with limited utility. But yes, we've been using infrared since the Vietnam conflict, and maybe even earlier.
So are you referring to that at FLIR again? The AT FLIR?
AT FLIR is on the Super Hornet now. It used to be the Nighthawk on the original Hornet.
Okay. I heard somewhere that the issue with using it in the air-to-air mode is that you can't automatically track something, I guess, unlike the IRST, which can actually stands for infrared search and track, where you actually have to line it up manually and then lock onto it. I don't know if you can get into all that, but
Well, it requires some amount of fingerology, we used to call it, to make it work. And the reason we didn't do it is there was just too much else going on, generally speaking, in an intercept to worry about it, especially in a single seat, which is what I flew most of the time. But in a two-seat aircraft like an FA-18F Super Hornet, where maybe you need to get a visual identification of something, you're not necessarily cleared to fire, but you need to figure out who it is, then in that situation, the WISO, weapons system operator in the back seat, would possibly call up the FLIR, and it can track an air-to-air target, but it's also subject to being blocked by the airframe of the vehicle. So if you are trying to look through to the right because it's mounted on the left cheek, well, then the aircraft is going to block it and you're going to drop the track. So there are some limitations with the utility of it based on where it's mounted.
yeah, it's what I thought it was interesting too. With you were talking about the drop or the external tank having the IRST system mounted there. On the Russian aircraft, they're mounted up on top.
Right.
So I don't know. Maybe they both just kind of have their own benefits depending on the situation. But it seems like, if you were in a turning fight, well, I guess at that point you'd already be within visual range and you wouldn't have to be using it. But so yeah, actually Tyler Rogoway has another really long, really good article about the history of IRST and goes through the whole thing. And he pretty much says exactly what you're saying. The U.S. played around with it back in the 60s. Pretty much what it came down to was the technology was really not there to really be useful. The Russians came out with it again at that time. It really wasn't that great. But over time now, the technology has developed and it's become a decently capable system. And now the U.S. is a little bit kind of playing catch up. So they've been developing that external, the IRST on that external drop tank. Well, not a drop tank anymore. And then also they're developing a new one called that Legion pod. So that's going to have an IRST system in it. So
I'm not familiar with the Legion, and I would say, to correct you, that the IRST is still going to have some fuel in the pod, just not as much as it used to.
Okay, yeah. So then when you were at Top Gun, obviously, and then also just in the Navy in general, I mean, you guys trained to go up against Russian jets regularly?
Yes, we considered the Russian-built aircraft as our percentage threat.
Right. And most of the world, at least people you'd be going up against, would have Russian aircraft. Did you guys ever did you ever go up against or use any of the aircraft that the U.S. acquired? Like, I know the U.S. has a few of the Sukhoi 27s and the MiG-29s that they acquired through different means.
There are certain things that we are told when we leave the service, and that is, even though you might see something out in open press that is classified, you are still required to protect the information because you can go to jail if you disclose. Yep. And so there are certain things, and I know now that even in the book Top Gun, written by the founder, Dan Peterson, he talks about the MiG-21 that they used to have and fly back in in the Vietnam conflict and other exploitation projects, and certain bases are in the Las Vegas vicinity. And so, we're required to tread lightly on that. And so I'm aware that it's happened in the past. I'm not aware of anything that's happening now, and I'd rather kind of leave it at that.
Fair enough. Yeah, I don't want to get you in trouble or us in trouble. So,
well, you guys are, you're not sworn by anything. I am. So.
No, I think it's great. And, so one of the things I love about people asking questions about like clearance stuff, right? Because I was on a submarine, so I had a secret clearance. People ask me stuff all the time. They're like, don't be afraid to ask people that stuff. Like these guys are trained to know what to say and not to say. So feel free to ask us whatever you want. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, don't be afraid about that. I get that. I get that a lot. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yep. Concur.
Interesting. So another topic I kind of wanted to bring up, I don't think you guys had it on the original Hornet or the aircraft you flew, but the newer radars are now the AESA radar. You want to go into that a little bit? Or
Sure.
I don't think they would have had that on any of your aircraft, right? The ones that you were flown back then.
No, I did fly with the APG-79 active electronically scanned array radar. And compared to the mechanically scanned radars I flew prior to that, and this was towards the end of my career when I flew it, it was amazingly better because what I mean by mechanically scanned is everyone's familiar with a little radar dish that bounces back left and right and up and down. You see them even at airports spinning around or on top of ships, or even little boats that come in and out of the harbor have those little spinning radars, and it's effectively the same thing. It's just something's moving and emitting. And so you can only move so quickly, but of course, electronically, you can go virtually at the speed of light. And so when I grew up in the F-18, as I'll put it, we had to work very hard to build situational awareness because we were limited in the technology as well as the capability of our mechanically scanned APG-65 radars. Plus, they just weren't that good by modern standards. And so towards the end of my career, as I began to fly with the APG-79, I always told people this is like cheating because suddenly there's all this information that's available to you, and it's really not that hard. And oh, by the way, with a mechanically scanned radar, as soon as you over there on the left, Greg, are a threat to me, and I'm scanning left and right, and I'm picking up a glimpse of you and a glimpse of Eric on the right, well, I've got to decide, all right, which one of you is my bigger threat? All right, I'm going to focus on you, Greg. So while I'm looking over to the left on you, guess what? My dish is no longer scanning over to the right. Well, Eric can come around and sucker punch me, and that's a real disadvantage. Now, with an electronically scanned array radar, I can send some of my little bits, I forget what they call these little arrays, but if you open it, you see all these different, I don't even know what to call them. But anyway, I can take some of them and steer them at you, but I can still scan the rest of the area and make sure I don't take a sucker punch. So it really is so much better situational awareness. It's really, again, like cheating. Add with that the Link 16, as it's called, multi-informational display system. Gosh, is that what MID stands for? I don't know. I'm sure Tyler can straighten me up. But, we've got these link systems now where everyone who's in this agreed upon network, think about going to a Starbucks and jumping on their Wi-Fi, right? Now imagine everybody on that Wi-Fi said, hey, there's a guy over here who's pickpocketing. Oh, hey, wait, here's a guy over here trying to steal a lady's purse, right? Everyone can share information if they're all on the same Starbucks Wi-Fi. Well, we can do the same thing with Link 16, and you have displays to share all that. So even if you're flying around with your radar off, you can still get information from someone else, but you can't necessarily help someone else with your picture. So the information available these days is incredible. And when you add all that together with a high-off boresight weapon like the AIM-9X and a Wizzo, in my case, when I flew with the very good Wizzos that I did towards the end of my career in the back, it's almost too much information. I was by then an old horse, and I almost couldn't take all the information. So the fighter pilots these days, I would submit, not to change the subject, but compared to the movies, they're not just devil-may-care, risk-taking, chest-thumping people. They are calculating, they're smart, they have to balance a lot of information, and they can make decisions very quickly and be as effective as possible. And so the demographic, I would say, has changed, and a lot of that has to do with the advanced technology that comes with systems such as the AESA, as you call it.
And with those data links, that Link 16 you mentioned, so you actually share information back and forth between aircraft. So one aircraft doesn't even need its radar on. It can actually pick up the information from another aircraft nearby, right?
Right, and so can other aircraft that aren't even the same type of aircraft. So, for example, an F-22, as I understand, can get information from Link 16. Thank you very much. But they have their own little network, so they play in their own little Wi-Fi band, if you will, with that example. But also the AWACS, the E-2 Hawkeyes, the J-Stars, all the Snoops and all the other crazy aircraft out there can all throw data into the net, as it's called.
Whereas before these data links, pretty much you had to you call up the AWACS and they would give you targeting information, the bearing or how far away it was, the altitude it was at, and that's pretty much all you had to go off of, right?
So when I started in the mid-90s, what a typical air-to-air intercept would consist of was somebody talking to me and trying to build for me a mental picture so that I could kind of see and imagine where it would be, and then position both my aircraft and my radar to eventually detect the group of interest out of possibly several, and then to manage my intercept geometry, kind of, again, using my own brain and some information available to me to try to maintain the advantage and kill without being killed, if the rules of engagement allowed. These days, and we had displays that would support, even back then, this information. We just didn't have this information. But these days, those same displays can be populated with all this information. So you have a God's eye view of where you are relative to your friendly forces, your enemy forces, geopolitical boundaries, all this different information. And instead of having to build a mental picture, which is quite frequently wrong, especially in my case, that you can look down at a glimpse and see it. And oh, by the way, with the joint helmet mounted cueing system, a lot of that can be conveyed right there in front of your face, no matter which way you're looking. So it is definitely a different arena today that we do battle in compared to 25 years ago when I began.
I could imagine, yeah. A lot different. I mean, even in DCS, that's mostly what it's like. But I think now some of the newer aircraft, they're incorporating the data links, so you can have a little bit of that. But that does give you a little bit of idea of it, I guess. But with the AESA radars, I mean, those are also in much longer range too, right?
Generally, I believe that is true, yes.
Okay.
I mean, it depends what you compare it to. Compared to a previous F-18 radar, yes. The Phoenix with it, or sorry, the F-14 with its AUG-9 was able to detect Soviet-style bombers at a very, very long range. So there's a lot that goes into detection.
True, yeah. And then also, again, I'm not sure if this is something you can get into, but there's a lot of talk of electronic warfare capabilities in AESA radar.
It has, as I understand it, much better electronic protection because of the technology that's in it, the ability to detect something and say, somebody's trying to spoof me, and to be able to work through that. Because electronic warfare, again, as we talked earlier, is one of those counters to, oh, look, we have radar, right? Think about Britain in World War II. Oh, well, gosh, then we're going to come up, the Germans did, and lay big big corridors of chaff, just little bits of aluminum in the field to try to confuse the radar. So to everything, there's always a counter. And so electronic attack is something that the Soviets were very good at back during the Cold War, because they realized they were at a technological disadvantage with the radar. So they said, well, let's just overwhelm the electromagnetic spectrum and maybe we can gain an advantage that way.
Yeah, even still today, that's something the Russians really work on. Even with, you hear about it all the time in the news in Syria, or even up there near Norway with them jamming GPS signals for even civilian aircraft. That has always been something that they've put a lot of effort into. Maybe we could move on to drones. What are your opinions on drones, like on carriers? So they had that X-47, that was X-47B that was taking off from a carrier a few years back. That seemed to have gotten canceled. There's been talks about making it an unmanned tanker aircraft, unmanned fighters.
Well, and I want to interrupt real quick because I think Boeing got the contract today for the unmanned aircraft. It's the M2. I believe. I'll have to look it up real quick, but yeah, somebody just
is that
yeah, I think so.
Stingray?
Somebody just got that contract today. It was Boeing for sure. I can't remember what their aircraft's called. I'll look it up real quick.
Okay, yeah, that'd be good. My opinion on that, it might be the MQ-25. It looks like based on a quick search here. My opinion on that is progress happens, and you can't stem the course of progress and try to change the tide. You can go with it, you can embrace it, and there's plenty of examples in history of sticking your head in the sand like the old ostrich technique and assuming there's no threat because you can't see or hear it. So I think there is a place for drones. I think there is a place for humans, because while machines are very good at doing repetitive tasks and other dangerous tasks, and take a look at any car line manufacturer, even Tesla, and you'll see examples of this. There are certain things that the robots will do, and there are certain things that the humans will do. And you have to ask yourself, why did they come to that? And my guess is smart people sat down and said, look, this makes the most sense. Let's let the robots do the welding and all these other things, and let's let the people do the things that the people are good at, whether it's the quality at the end or whatever. And so I think there's a place for drones in the battle space. I think there's a place for drones on the carrier, and I think that it's coming. So we need to embrace it. As far as implementing the unmanned aerial vehicles in the carrier operations with manned aircraft, there's going to be some growing pains, and I'm sure there will be some close calls perhaps and other objectives to learn here to make sure how are we going to do this. And they'll get there, just like they have with other technology that's come along. And so I think there will be an opportunity for Boeing or whomever to decide, yes, this is what we want to do, and we can have gas airborne all the time because we'll just put up a tanker, and it doesn't matter that the guy is tired because there's nobody in it. You can swap the guys at the console down on the ship. As far as those aircraft doing combat, of course, anyone who remembers the Terminator series thinks about Skynet. I think there could be an element of weapons being delivered from drones that are making their own decisions, and that's why I had to put that extra little bit on it, because, of course, we've been launching weapons from drones for the last 20 years, just about overseas, and there's been a lot of consternation with that. But there's always been a man in the loop, and of course by man I mean man or woman.
Right.
But
actually controlling it. It's not
correct.
Making its own decisions.
Yeah, it's not just going out and eradicating threats as it sees it, because again, you could have the Skynet situation and we could turn into the threat. As far as fighter aircraft go, I think, as I've postulated before on my own show, the most likely scenario that I can think of right now is we tow little drones, if you will, behind the aircraft. And I could see an unmanned wingman that's not attached to us by anything but electronically, that carries more weapons, is a larger target visually and acoustically and infrared wise. And so it's like a wingman that if he gets shot down, you don't have to go tell the spouse that, the person's gone. I think that would be the most likely first step. If later drones are waging war against each other without humans anywhere in the air, that's not in my lifetime, I wouldn't think.
Right. So almost like I think I've seen a few of those concepts, almost like a truck carrying a whole bunch of AMRAAMs with it that can fire off then. So you think tankers, because it's more of a repetitive task, those ones will be more likely to appear soon. Fighters, yeah, that seems like something you're still going to need at least a pilot in control for the foreseeable future for now, until it can actually have the technology mature to a point where it could be making decisions and reacting to different threats.
Right. But don't mistake that even a rather simple and, lowly, quote unquote, tanker mission is also fraught with decisions and contingencies. So if the aircraft carrier decides to trundle right into the middle of a storm, well, a good tanker pilot will try to hold outside of the storm and where they can see the flight operations ongoing, because if someone needs the help, well, then guess what? They can what's called hawk a burdened aircraft, and if they bolter or wave off one more time, which is simply not landing on the carrier, well, then that tanker pilot, if he's good, can be right in the position where that distressed pilot can say, oh, thank goodness. And if you've ever read the book Flight of the Intruder by Stephen Kuntz, there's a fictional account of that happening early in the book, but it could be very realistic because I've seen and experienced that myself. And it talks about the pilot taking risk, but basically saving the pilot of the burdened aircraft and the aircraft itself. And can a drone do that even if it's under the control of someone, but not in the aircraft? I don't know. Maybe eventually, but I think you're always going to want people involved, and you will lose some capability with drones, but you will gain some too, like the ability to take an aircraft and just leave it up for hours and hours without worrying about fatigue. So it is, to go back to the earlier topic, a trade-off.
Yeah, I can imagine those long, like that Global Hawk, which is an unmanned aerial vehicle that can stay airborne for hours and hours and hours, no problem. So I guess I can get back to a few questions about your career. Did you ever have any real long missions where you were just in there for a while? Like I said, I was in that F-16 cockpit just for a few minutes, and I'm a big guy, so it might be a little bit different, but I could not possibly imagine sitting in that thing for hours and hours.
I need to go check my logbook because I don't remember and don't have it on the top of my mind what my longest flight was. But I would think it's about 5.5 to 6 hours, which is probably 7 hours in the seat because you man up 30 minutes prior, and then once you land, you have to taxi around to shut down. And you get uncomfortable a little bit, but it's not like you just all of a sudden one day jump in and go. I mean, you're doing shorter duration flights, and your body adapts, I should say, to the seat, and you find little best techniques and tips and tricks for being comfortable. The anti-G suit that we wear plugs into the aircraft and is fed from the bleed air from the engines, and there's a button you can push ostensibly to test it, but you can also push it to inflate the bladders that work to help maintain the blood in your body as you're pulling G's, and you can use that as a little mini massage, if you will. You can kind of push it and release it a few times to get the blood flowing in your legs and your torso. You can also scrunch around a little bit. As far as that goes, you can't get up and go make a sandwich, but you can you can sit up a little bit, or you can unstrap for short periods of time and just try to get yourself comfortable. You do have to figure out how to relieve yourself up there, and that can be very difficult. And you have to bring along enough sustenance on those longer flights to eat and then not have too much debris when you're done, because you can't just jettison it. And so you figure out a way to do it. And your body also gets smart enough. I never had a problem with it. I mean, some people who had bad food or something had to deal with going number 2. But for me, I think my body just got smart enough. I mean, I tried to plan ahead and make sure I went to the aircraft empty, at least in that regard. And, you have to hydrate. So you're going to need on longer missions to use what they call a piddle pack. But as far as the other process goes, I was thankful that my body just basically said, hey, look, this is something I'm not going to do right now. And it just shut down, and it wasn't a problem. And I can remember a couple times landing and saying, oh my gosh, I really have to go. But it was just kind of turned off until then. So I don't think everyone is that fortunate. And certainly on other aircraft, they have the ability to get up and use a facility. But in the airplanes that we fly in fighter world, yes, you may have to be in there for a long time. And I have nothing on the people who flew these across oceans for 10 or 12 hours at a time. I don't know how they did it. I never had that opportunity. I would have loved to, just to be able to say that I did. But that, I got to think, is a long, painful mission.
And that must be repeated refueling at tankers, right?
Oh, yes.
To do that.
Yeah, I want to say my most number of stops was probably 4 or 5, which doesn't sound like that many, but it can be. And if you're going across the ocean, you will follow a tanker, and you might refuel a half a dozen or a dozen times. I never did it, but you stop along the way. If you're going from, let's say, San Diego to Japan, you're going to go first to Hawaii and then over to, excuse me, I don't know my geography real well, but you might stop at Wake Island and then Midway and then Guam or something along those lines. But anyway, you try to leapfrog across and try to minimize the risk the best you can.
Oh, that does bring up one of my random questions I had written down here for you. I've always been curious, can those external fuel tanks that we were talking about, can those be refueled while airborne from a tanker?
Yes.
They can, okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you plug into the tanker, the fuel will go in virtually all available empty tanks, internal and external, unless you tell it not to.
Okay. And then also, I guess while we're along these lines here, so for the Hornet, they call it the FA-18, right? Typically.
Right.
Now, why do they call it the FA instead of just the F? Like, for example, I know it's multi-role, but they don't call it the FA-16 or FA-35. Do you know if there's a reason for that?
As I understand it, and I'm not the authority on this, but as the F-18 came out of the loser F-17 from the light fighter attack that the Air Force selected the F-16, that the Navy was on the sidelines watching, and because the A-6 was getting ready to go away, the A-7 was getting ready to go away, the F-14 was getting older, although not that much by the late 70s, but they're always looking ahead, that they said, well, this aircraft was designed as the F-17. Of course, it went through many modifications. I believe it was the Northrop YF-17, and then McDonnell Douglas got involved and turned it into the F-18. But because it started life as a fighter and would be used that way, and then also was going to replace some of the attack aircraft, that I'm just speculating now, it's possible to get the funding or to satisfy certain people that McDonnell Douglas told them, hey, look, we're going to call this the FA-18 because it's going to replace both and it's going to do both. And to your point, absolutely, Greg, the F-16, frankly, is more of an attack fighter, attack aircraft for the Air Force than fighter. And the F-20, everything today is multi-role, multi-mission. And so all of them could be called the FA whatever. And in fact, you've got an A aircraft really that should have been called that. That was the F-117, but that's different. That was trying to be surreptitious and everything. But yes, they could all be called that, but as I understand it, it had to do with funding and selecting, etc. And so it earned the moniker F/A, meaning, hey, it's a fighter and it's attack. And back in the early 80s, that was important, and nowadays we take it for granted.
Even the F-22, that's starting to get some air-to-ground capability as well with those the STBs, a small diameter bomb. I believe
Right.
it can carry a few JDAMs too, right?
I believe that's correct. The smaller ones, not the 2,000-pound ones. We had an episode on my show about fourth and fifth generation aircraft, and I think it was an outtake I played at the very, very end about that at one point we were trying to remember if it was true or just folklore that the F-22 early on, when it was going through some budgeting constraints, they all said, oh, by the way, we're going to call this the FA-22. And then apparently they received the funding they needed and they dropped it like a hot potato because, I mean, I'm not stereotyping, but as I understood it, the Air Force guys said, we don't want to be called an A anything. We're fighter guys. So, I'm adding a little extra drama, of course. But supposedly that's what happened. And, hey, never let the truth get in the way of a good story is what I'm told.
No, definitely. So that's kind of, I think that was the story behind that F-117 like you were mentioning. Or was that more for kind of deception to make people think it was more of a fighter?
I think there was some deception. I'm also told that it had to do with attracting the right Air Force personnel because nobody wanted to go fly anything that didn't have an F in front of it, at least not the quality pilots. And so this came up on one of our episodes about nomenclature, and at the time I didn't know as much. And that's one good thing. If you guys haven't already figured this out, I'm sure you have. If you want to learn about something, start a podcast because people will tell you when you're wrong. And so I've learned, I waxed about this poetic the other day. I feel in many regards I've learned more in the last 2 years of doing a podcast than I did in my previous 25, at least on certain things. And so many listeners came along and sent me links and different things about, they called it this because they wanted to attract the best talent, or they wanted to spoof the Soviets, or they wanted to get the money even. And so I don't know. Nobody will ever know for sure, but you do the best with the information you get.
Right.
So I actually had a question. So, big submarine guy, there's like a, not necessarily a conspiracy, but a little fun story going around about how, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it's probably a month or two ago by now. Time flies, but Japan lost their F-35, or they lost an F-35, and it sank pretty deep. Today, the Navy announced that they found it, but if something like that went down, I mean, obviously it's not something crazy like a U-2, but something like that, something new that goes down in the ocean, is something like that pretty valuable to keep secret? Like if they found that thing, I mean, because the F-35 flies around in the open all the time. There's not like it's very secret compared to like the Belgorod, like a super secret submarine or something like that. So if they got a hold of something like that, would it even matter, or what could they do with something like that?
Well, it absolutely matters because it's one thing to go to an air show and put your hands on it if they'll even let you and take pictures. And I can guarantee you operatives from many countries have done that of the F-35 and other military hardware. It's a different story to have it in your hangar in parts. Granted, it's soaked in seawater, but if you know what that does to certain components, you can reverse engineer and say, okay, well, if, before it was immersed, it would have done this. And so we can figure it out. That is through the ages how military technology is stolen and then turned into other technology. As I understand it, one of the first AIM-9 Sidewinder heat-seeking missiles impacted a Chinese aircraft when China and Taiwan were exchanging blows. I forget how long ago, 50s, 60s. And the aircraft that it hit flew back and landed with it. And so they extracted it. If you've ever seen Black Hawk Down, you know about the guy in one of the scenes there who's got like an unexploded RPG in the side of him. And, you extract the thing and then, okay, let's dearm it first off and make it safe. And then let's take it apart and figure out how it works. There are examples all throughout history of the Soviets doing that to us. And I can't rattle off a handful of things that we've done in return, but I guarantee you it's happening. But refer to your earlier question that I sort of punted on. And so that's just how it goes. And yes, absolutely. It was in the news that both Russia and China had surface vessels out there trying to find it because, hey, finders keepers, right? If you drop a $20 bill at the airport as you're walking by and you turn around and you try to grab it and other people are like, oh, look, everybody's going to jump on it because who doesn't want that? So absolutely that is huge. And the Americans did try to jump on that. It sounds like they did. And I'm guessing there's some international court that would have sided with us, but who cares? I mean, if the Soviets, or now the Russians, have it, they're going to either deny they have it or they're going to say, tough, sue us.
Right. Kind of like the, was that RQ-170 or 180? I'm getting confused now. That stealth drone that went down over Iran. You can nicely ask for it back, but...
Yeah, I was in Afghanistan when that went down, and I probably shouldn't say too much, but I just remember suddenly the room I worked in at a special operations command, they said, all right, you and you leave. Everybody else, here's what we're going to do. And I was one of the people who had to leave, but within a few days, started to figure out what was going on and what they were trying to do. And later on when it came out, I was like, oh, wow, that was interesting. But yeah, that's how it goes.
Yeah, that story was really interesting. I know there's been different things that have leaked out, and you get different sides of the story. So from what I heard, I think the U.S. was actually trying to bomb it to destroy it. And what the Iranians,
I wouldn't doubt that.
Yeah, and what the Iranians did was instantly they went there and they broke it into 3 pieces. And then they I believe they took them in, I'm getting confused now, I haven't read the story for a while, but either by helicopter or by truck in 3 different vehicles to 3 different areas. And then later on, they brought them back together. So that way, if the U.S. did try to bomb it, they would, not be able to get all 3 pieces. Yeah,
well, all they need to do is put a family in the vehicle with the thing and, or some orphans, and it would have been off limits anyway. But, when you lose a toy, over the fence of your neighbor, and lo and behold, they don't want to send it back, well, then guess what? They get a new football or whatever it is, and that's just how it goes if you don't get along with your neighbors, I guess.
So speaking of that, China has been a big one, really building up real quick. I mean, just probably when you were in the Air Force, it was just, or I'm sorry, not the Air Force, in the Navy, it wasn't anywhere near the size of it. It's just really grown exponentially in the last decade. It seems like building up aircraft carriers, stealth aircraft. What do you make of that? Is there any observations you've made, or do you think things have changed in the Navy? From the way that they're training against these different aircraft compared to, like you said, when you were there, it was mostly up against Russian aircraft?
Yes, absolutely. So I would say that when I came into the Navy and we talked about China, an expression might be something like, oh, look, how cute. And today it would be more like, holy, fill in expletive. So they have definitely spent a lot of money in the last quarter century to bolster their military and their positioning around the world, including in their part of the world with the Spratly Islands and the other contested airspace and sea space around some very popular parts of the ocean. And they have done a good job, I would say, of acquiring the latest and greatest military hardware, in some cases buying it from other countries, in some cases stealing it, presumably. I have no evidence to prove that, but that's just my own personal assertion, as well as building their own. And because when they buy something from someone, they can take it apart and say, we can do a better job than that. And so they have gone from a sideshow, if I may say, to the main event and are a pure threat, as we call it now. And I take some comfort in thinking that while there's a lot of bluster in the news about tariffs and differences in certain parts of the world, I have to think that in this modern age, especially with our economy so closely linked, this might be a little pie in the sky, but man, I have to think, I don't know. I would be really worried about a conflict with China, and not just militarily, but just, you thought 9/11 upset our world. Think about an all-out slugfest with them, the 2 major economies and military forces in the world. And boy, nothing good is going to come of that. If you're interested, my friend Kevin Miller, he writes books on military-themed subjects, and he's got one called Fight, Fight. And it is the 3rd installment in a series where you meet the hero in the first one, and by the 3rd one, the hero is the Air Wing commander, and he's involved in a not full-out fist fight, but kind of just some traded punches and some limited conflict, and what that could look like militarily and politically. And it's really eye-opening because while he takes his best guess at some of the weapons they might have that we don't know of, or at least you and I don't know of, maybe someone in the Pentagon knows, that what it could do to our carriers, what it could do to our aircraft, we would lose people, we would lose military hardware. It would be very destructive. And it's a chilling but very entertaining story, and I hope the right people read it so that it never happens.
Yeah, it's really incredible how quickly, and some of the aircraft do resemble in different ways some U.S. aircraft, like the F-35, for example. It's been pretty open. I'm not sure if the U.S. admitted to it directly, but it's been in the news all over that they got almost the entire blueprints and the source code of the F-35. They were able to hack it. And then they pretty quickly came out with that J-20, the stealth fighter, which is more akin, I believe, to the F-22. And now they're also developing that the J-31, which I think is more akin to, it's going to be a naval fighter taken off from the carrier, I believe, in the future, closer to the F-35. And then even missiles too, like they have that PL-12, which is akin to the AMRAAM. All right, now even that PL-15, which has, I believe, almost double the range.
I'm no longer privy to intelligence reports like I used to receive, but if the open media press is to be believed, then yes, all those are happening, and there are hacks continually as they probe us. I presume we do the same in return, and that's just the nature of warfare.
Yeah, and that's the hardest part, because with computer hacking and all that stuff, it's really, because you have to be completely secure on every angle, and you have no idea when you're going to be attacked or when someone is going to try to hack you. Whereas the offensive, the person doing the hacking only has to find one little weak link in the chain somewhere at some time, and then they're in. So it's very difficult to fight against that. And then also, like you were saying, I'm sure the U.S. does some offensive hacking as well. Just right now, I think the U.S. is still a little bit more advanced in terms of technology, so there's not too much, besides information and intelligence you can get out of it, but not a lot of technology. I mentioned missiles a little bit, and AMRAAM, and then even going back to the Sparrow, which I'm sure you would have used a Sparrow back in the early 2000s, and then the AMRAAM as well, right?
Correct.
So the difference between those two, one is a semi-active radar homing, and the other one is actually fully active radar, which means it actually has a radar in the front of the missile, and it can guide itself by itself terminally to hit the target. Do you want to talk about the differences between those two a little bit? Maybe the benefits of one versus the other?
Sure. So go back to my earlier example where Greg is attacking me from the left and Eric is attacking me from the right, and I have a mechanically scanned radar. And let's say I only have Sparrows for today. That's the AIM-7. Well, if I decide I want to attack Greg, well, then my mechanically scanned radar is going to stop, stare at you, provide continual wave illumination. So it's just going to, like a fire hose, just blast out water. And what's going to happen is my Sparrow is going to say, okay, I see that, I can make it. And when it is fired, it will home in on the reflections off of Greg's target. And so while that's happening, I, again, to my earlier point, have no idea what you're doing, Eric. You could sneak around and trip me or stab me, whatever. And so that is a disadvantage, because until my missile impacts, I can do nothing but support it, and only that one. Now, I can shoot two at Greg, but I can't shoot one at Greg and one at Eric at the same time. Now, with the AMRAAM, the AIM-120, now with appropriate physics, if you will, and by that I simply mean geometry, as long as my radar can see both of you, that I can say, okay, hey, AMRAAM, there's one over here and there's one over there. Now, I'm going to launch you both, and I'm going to tell you where they are in time and space and speed and all this other stuff, and I'm going to keep updating you on your way out there. Now, if I'm only staring at Greg, well, then I can provide better situational awareness of where Greg is for the AMRAAM. But if I take my time and look between Greg and Eric, well, then I can give slightly less precise information to both, but I can at least give both. And so what happens is the AMRAAM goes off and it says, all right, fine. Hey, listen, I'm going to close my eyes for a while because my dish is so small that I'm just going to do what you tell me till a certain point. And then at that point, I'm going to open my eyes and I'm going to look. And I'm going to look where you tell me. And I'm going to look for the target that has the parameters you tell me. And if I see it, then I'm on my own. I'm good to go. And so in that scenario, provided I give it the good information, it gets to that point midway through its flight, let's say, where it opens its eyes and says, Hey, AMRAAM number 1 over here, I see Greg. Hey, AMRAAM number 2, I see Eric. Okay, you guys go on your own. See you later. Me, I'm retiring out of the bar because I don't want to start, whacking each other with beer bottles. I'm going to let whatever I threw at you, I don't know, this example is going sideways, but, but the idea being is I can look at both of you, I can engage both of you, and then I can run away from both of you.
Interesting. You mentioned the Phoenix. Now, why did they retire that missile? I know it was designed and built for the F-14, and maybe it's too big of a missile to fit on the F-A-18. But it
was never going to be adapted. The F-18, yeah, that was never going to happen. It, as I understand it, it was very heavy, very expensive, somewhat limited in its capability. And as with most things, when you are spending someone else's dollars, i.e., the taxpayer, you have to make tough decisions. And there came a point in the early 2000s where they said, you know what, the F-14 will be around a little bit longer, but let's go ahead and retire the Phoenix, because at that point they could do what they needed with other systems. And frankly, for the last 20 years, there hasn't been much of an air-to-air threat. And so I'm not second-guessing or Monday morning quarterbacking, but it's possible they said, look, let's just slap some bombs on this thing and we're going to be fine, which for the last 20 years has been true. For the next 20 years, that may not be the case. Right. Reference our earlier discussion.
Right, with China.
Right, but that has been the case in the past.
And also, you probably need a much more powerful, longer-range radar like that AUG-9 that the F-14 has.
Well, again, it's a trade-off, and even though I sat through plenty of murder boards as my fellow Top Gun instructors were practicing to get ready for that presentation for the students, and I was exposed to it, since I didn't fly it, it didn't really stick with me as well. So I remember there being limitations. Obviously, the farther away it is, the less precise your radar will be. And so there were some drawbacks, but against a non-maneuvering threat like a bomber coming after the surface fleet of your carrier, then yeah, Phoenix and the AUG-9 were going to work real well. If you're trying to attack a fighter 100 miles away and he knows you're being shot at, well, if he turns sideways, you're going to miss, kind of thing, because it wasn't accounted for any kind of maneuvering. So I don't know. I guess the Iranians maybe got some kills with the Phoenix. I don't think the U.S. Navy ever did.
Right, that's what I read. They never did. Yeah.
And so I mean, but who knows? Had the balloon gone up in a Cold War, I have to think some of it would have worked. Maybe not all of them.
So that weapon was more designed to go after bombers or even Russian AEW aircraft, right? It wasn't meant for fighters.
No, but it could be adapted to that, but it would have maybe a relatively low probability of success depending on what the threat did while you shoot it. I mean, even an F-16, as highly maneuverable as it is, if it flies straight at you for 100 miles or 200 miles, yeah, you might be able to shoot it at 100 miles, provided the AUG-9 could see it. But as soon as it turns sideways, and again, if a bomber turned sideways, it would probably do the same thing, but the bombers were understood that they weren't going to do that. They were probably going to fly straight at the carrier to launch their anti-ship missiles.
Now, when you're talking about turning sideways, are you referring to beaming?
Just any maneuver at all, really.
Oh, okay. So just making it bleed energy on the missile to...
Right.
Okay.
Right. Well, I mean, think about, I don't know, maybe this is a bad example, but think about a quarterback in one end zone and a receiver in the other. Now, of course, this would never happen in a real football play, but imagine the runner in the opposite end zone or the receiver, I should say, starts running at the quarterback, and let's say his maximum range is a 60-yard throw. Well, when the receiver is at about 80 yards, he should throw it, because when he gets to 60, it'll be there. Now, if the receiver doesn't change his speed, but changes his direction, and instead of running directly downfield, runs at an angle, well, then he'll never make it to the 60-yard line. So even if the quarterback knows where he'll end up, if he sends the ball at the same point in time, the receiver will not be there at the same point in time, and so it just won't have the ability to get there. It takes a little imagination on that example. I apologize. I'm full of crazy analogies, but the idea being is that as soon as you don't run straight at the quarterback, you're not going to make it as far, and so your pass isn't going to work.
Right. So if you make the missile turn, if it's still burning, that's energy it could be using to gain up more speed and then get further, so it arrives at the target at a higher speed.
Well, or at all, because if you shoot at the maximum range, then yes, the assumption is that if the other airplane turns at all, it probably just won't have the kinematics to make it.
Right. So that's air to air. And then the interesting thing about the F-A-18, of course, is it's multi-role. So I can imagine when you went through the schooling, there must have been a lot. Not only did you have to learn how to fight in the air, but also go through and learn weapons like you guys had the harpoon, the slam, or even the slammer, the longer range one, the harm, the anti-radiation missile to shoot at radars, and then bombs, the whole 9 yards.
Sure. Forward firing air-to-surface weapons, GPS weapons, laser-guided weapons, rockets, napalm, although we don't do much with napalm, but I think the Marines might. There are so many different things you have to understand as a fighter pilot that I have before equated it, frankly, if I may be so bold, to the things that society typically puts on a pedestal, like a doctor or an attorney or an entrepreneur or a CEO. It is very complex. It requires a great deal of study. And unlike those other things, if you screw up, maybe you're disbarred or lose your medical license, but you're not going to die. And in combat aviation, that is a very likely scenario, even in training. And so you have to know everything about your airplane, including how to fly it, how to land it, how to handle emergencies. Then you have to know how to fight your aircraft, which is all the air-to-air weapons, all the air-to-surface weapons, all the different ways to employ all those weapons. You might be on an offensive mission. You could be on a defensive mission. You could be attacking targets in the open. You could be attacking targets right next to friendly forces. Then you have to know everything about anything that's trying to kill you. So any surface-to-air missile, any air-to-air aircraft that you might face. And oh, by the way, if you do get shot down and you land, then you have to know how to egress and survive and resist and all these different things. And then on top of all that, that's just your side job, by the way. You're a naval officer or an Air Force officer first. And so you have to deal with leadership and leading young people and dealing with reports and all these mundane things that never get told in a movie like Top Gun. And so it really is a full commitment. Plus you're gone part of the year if you deploy. So I would say it deserves every bit the recognition and honor of any other career that you could list, and that being a fighter pilot.
Wow. Yeah, that's certainly a lot. It was interesting you brought down, if you get shot down and you survive landing, then you have to survive on the ground. There's a few interesting declassified training videos back from World War II with different bomber, and they're really interesting to watch, like how to survive in the Arctic or how to survive in the desert if you get shot down. Those are some pretty interesting ones to watch, and just all the things they go through. So this kind of leads me to one of the other random questions I had. We were talking about harm and the different air-to-surface weapons. So that harm is to go after enemy radar emissions. The role that is called is SEAD, or is it pronounced SEAD?
Well, that's like anything. Yeah. I mean, I'm not one to pronounce anything. Let me rephrase that. I'm not one to tell you how to pronounce anything. Okay. I mean, I had lunch today with a young lady from South Africa, and although we're using the same words, I had to really concentrate because of the dialect and the pronunciation and the emphasis on the wrong syllable is right. You have to concentrate. So the three of us all speak very similarly, and I haven't had to give an ounce of thought to it, but you can call it what you want, but it is the letters SEAD, and it stands for the suppression of enemy air defenses. And it simply means that you are trying to counter the thing that's trying to counter you. And there are plenty of tales of this through the Vietnam conflict and throughout Desert Storm and any other conflict. It is part of warfare. Absolutely.
Oh yeah. So I'm sure if you go through your YouTube comments or different things, you get people correcting you. Oh no, it's SEAD, not SEAD. But so I figured you'd be the right person to ask on that one, and I can get corrected. But I'll take your answer.
I call it both. Okay. Even I do, because it just depends on in what context I'm using it, right? So, hey, we're on a SEAD mission tonight, I might say, but hey, who's got the SEAD over or something? I mean, it just depends on what feels right at the moment. But I never had anyone correct me in my experience, so let's put it that way.
So is that something you had to train for and go through how to operate, for example, in the here's another one, how to pronounce the IADS, the Integrated Air Defense System, or IADS?
Yeah. IADS is what we would call that.
Or was that more left to the Wild Weasels, to the EA-18 Growlers, or the Prowlers back then?
Well, Prowlers it was with the EA-6B and now the Growlers. We also were involved in that mission because we could carry the AGM-88 harm. And so, yes, that is a mission we were involved in.
Interesting.
So I want to step back and ask you kind of a basic question. So once you become a naval officer and you decide that you want to fly something, like how does that hierarchy work, right? Because obviously I think the top of the food chain would be like an astronaut, right? And then you'd maybe want to be like a U-2 pilot, or then you just, I think it really kind of work your way down the altitudes. But like I was listening to episode 40 of your podcast where you talked to Commander Regadio, I think is how you pronounce his last name, and he flew a Seahawk, right? So a helicopter. So can you kind of maybe like guide us through the process of like how you pick your plane or whatever you get to fly?
Sure. Well, when you are in a commissioning program, meaning a Naval Academy, let's say Air Force Academy, ROTC in my case, you at some point are asked to provide your wish list. And what they do is they take everyone's wish list. They take the number one student, put him on the top. They take the number last student, put that person on the bottom. And then they take the first one and say, okay, this guy wants to be a submariner. Oh, look, we have a submarine position available. Boom, there's a nice match. Okay, number two person wants to be a pilot. Okay, we have a pilot position. They go down as far as the openings allow, and at some point you might get to a person who wants to be a pilot, but there's no more pilot slots, but we have a naval flight officer, a backseater, and they say, okay, well, that's his second choice, so we'll give them that. And it pays to do well because you have a better chance of getting what you want. So you start off with getting flight school, and then once you're in flight school, everybody starts in the same basic aircraft to learn basic flying and landings and emergencies. And at that point, you then get to your next checkpoint, and they take their list of available openings in helicopters and maritime aircraft like the P-3 or the P-8 and fighters, and they take the number one person graduating from basic that week, and they say, okay, what does he or she want? Oh, she wants to be a fighter pilot. Okay, here's one. The second person, oh, gosh, you know what? Too bad. We only had one fighter pilot slot this week, and number one just took it. So number two, you're getting your third choice, and that is this. So it comes down to needs of the Navy and your performance. And you can only control one of those. You have to do your best. And then the rest of it, you just have to have your own personal coming to Jesus. And if you remember that discussion, Frank, as his call sign is, I asked him that at the end because he and also a friend of mine who came on and talked about air intercept communications, he wanted to be a fighter pilot, and he ended up being an E-2 Hawkeye naval flight officer. I mean, that's as far from it as you can get. But both of them said the same thing. Once you're in it, you learn to love it. And if you don't, you just get out earlier, and probably I wouldn't have found you anyway. But you find what's good in it. You find the bad. And oh, by the way, we do the same thing in everything. I mean, look at our political system. Look at society. It's what we do all the time anyway. You make the most out of your lot in life. And this is what I like to tell young people. You don't have the same path I have. All three of us on this show right now have different paths. And my path is not your path, Greg. And Eric, your path is the different than mine. So we shouldn't worry about the other person's. Now, do a lot of people want to walk the path I have? Absolutely. And what I tell them is do your best and be prepared. And if the opportunity presents itself, you'll love it. But if your path is different than mine, then you've got to come to your own terms with that, and you have to accept it. Now, to be fair, there are people who want to fly helicopters. There are people that want to fly the E-2 or be in the back seat. But a lot of people, whether it's the movies or the speed or the control, the thrill, I don't know. A lot of people do want to be fighter pilots. Not many of them, let me rephrase that, not all of them get to be, and they have to come to terms with that. Some handle it better than others.
Awesome. And that's, I think that's what most of the Navy, and I can't speak for the Air Force, but it seems like everybody in the Navy kind of goes through that same thing, because when I went to sub school, they said, hey, look, here's 7 submarines, top of the class gets to pick, and you just work your way down. And so I was pretty close to the top, so I just picked the newest submarine they had, right? So I ended up on the Hampton. So yeah, definitely. So I just wanted to make sure that was what you guys went through too. So.
Yeah. Yeah, good stuff. We don't always pick the newest airplanes. Sometimes certain squadrons have better reputations, or you might also look at their schedule and say, well, these guys leave right away, even though they have the newest airplanes. I don't want to leave right away. But, there's a lot that goes into it, and the people can make up for it. I flew older, if you will, F-18s in most of my squadrons, and I always had a good time because the people make it. And I've said on my own show that people join the military to fly. They stay because of the people. You build relationships that you'll never find anywhere else. So I enjoyed that thoroughly, and I still get to interact with many of them, which is great. So I do want to tell you, though, it's getting late, and I'd like to try to maybe see my kids before they head off. So what else we got?
Real quick, I want to ask you a little bit about life after the Navy, but real quick before I do that, I have to mention the Kommando store again real quick. They have everything, jackets, pants, boots, shirts, gloves, hats, tools, patches, stickers, everything you can possibly imagine. Much of it is Cold War era, some real interesting stuff. Again, go over and check out their website, kommandostore.com, Kommando with a K. You get 5% off on your first order if you use our coupon code. That's TACOPS, no space in between there. Kommandostore.com. So after you left the Navy, or actually, if I can ask you, how was it getting into that cockpit for the last time? When you knew it was going to be your last flight, I can imagine it could be a little bit emotional.
Yeah, hold on. I was just ordering a waxy boot, but I'll have to wait. Yeah,
make sure you use the TechOps coupon.
That's right.
There. Thanks.
That's right. You know it's coming, and you just come to grips with it, because even though it's something you enjoy doing and it's such a major part of your life, not everything lasts forever. And it's sad, it's bittersweet, but it's also it's good, because you get to a point where your neck hurts and your family wants you home, and it's just the next generation can pick up the torch and keep going. And so it's hard to admit for some people, but for me, I knew it was coming. In fact, I tried to retire in 2015 and failed because I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I stuck around a couple more years, and when I finally went, I'd been thinking about it for several years. So I was ready, and it was sad, but I actually ended up having 3 final flights, which I know sounds oxymorphal, but morphical? I don't know, whatever it is. But, my family came out and said, they got me all wet for one of them. It's like a tradition you do. And then there ended up being one more flight I was able to do. And then the very last one, I knew at that point it was going to be it. And it was bittersweet. I took the F-18 that I was flying up as high as it would go, at least as high as I was comfortable going, and to about 1.6 times the speed of sound, and went fast, buzzed some ships over the ocean. And just when I was landing, I said, this is it. And it's been a good life. I'm going to share this with people, and I hope that I can bring them pleasure, and in doing so still gain pleasure out of my opportunity to do this, which I'm so fortunate for, because you can't pay to do that, and to get paid to do it is amazing. You don't always think of that month 3 on a 6 or 8 month deployment, but it really was an amazing opportunity, and I am thrilled to have had it. And so it's bittersweet.
So then now you said you were actually, you fly for an airline. So what was that transition like then, going from being a naval pilot to flying a commercial airline?
Well, I didn't know at first that was what I wanted to do, but I knew I needed to put food on the table. So I kept dipping a toe in that pool, as I put it, of, hey, I guess I better go get the qualification. I guess I'll fill in an application. Oh, look, they called. I guess I'll go interview. And once I learned more about it, I wish I'd have done it sooner, frankly. In 2015, I'd be far more senior right now, because for pilots in the airlines, it's all about when you get there. And so the transition was challenging, but not impossible. I think once you land on an aircraft carrier at night, you feel like you can do just about anything. And it's really benign. You just have to learn the new systems and how they want you to do certain things. And so I adapted to it, I would say, fairly easily. And I've been flying now for an airline for 2 years, and it's been uneventful. I mean, I won't say I've been perfect, but, nothing that would make any sort of news. Just a little, hey, you landed a little hard, or you forgot this procedure, or you forgot, nothing unsafe. But, you're always learning. And I think that is true for pilots anywhere. The day you stop learning, you better retire, because you're going to mess something up. So I've taken to it. My family enjoys the travel privileges. I don't mind the schedule. I actually have a red eye tomorrow flying from, I think, Los Angeles to Atlanta. So, you miss a night of sleep, but you take a nap. And so it's been good, and I've enjoyed it.
So now you have a podcast, the Fighter Pilot Podcast.
Yeah. So all through my career, I would always meet people who were just interested, fascinated, just blown away that, oh my gosh, you're a fighter pilot? And I'd look at them, shrug, like, yeah, Yeah, and then this morning I put on my pants, left leg, right leg, and my wife thinks I can't do anything right. I mean, I'm glad you think I'm something, but, I'm just a normal dude. And, whether it's your crazy uncle or neighbors of your family, when you're a military pilot, people are just amazed by it. And I don't know if it's Hollywood, Top Gun, Scott O'Grady's shoot down, the stoic appearance of military pilots. They are a spectacle. And so I enjoyed that. I appreciated that. And I always enjoyed sharing what I did because they wanted to know what's it like to sit in an ejection seat or land on an aircraft carrier. And when I left the Navy in 2017, as I knew it was coming, I thought, I don't want to just walk away from this. And so I saw an opportunity where, although there are many channels on YouTube, there's many different, Instagram accounts and all this different stuff on military aviation, nobody was doing a podcast. And I'd had a positive experience as a guest on a podcast. And so I thought, I think this is something I could do. And it doesn't sound like it'd be that much work. And that was a mistake. And so I started the Fighter Pilot Podcast, so named because I wanted people to understand what it is. And in doing so, I share this world now with listeners, and they're eating it up. It's just me usually and a guest, and I have a co-host, and we talk about whether it's aerial refueling or ejection seats or landing on carriers, all those different topics. And it's really grown and blossomed, and it's been a pleasure to do. And so it's called the Fighter Pilot Podcast. It is fighterpilotpodcast.com. Any social media platform you go to, just look for those words, and you should find us. And it's a lot of fun.
It really is a great podcast. I'm really happy I found it. I really think it's kind of a funny story, just how I came across it, and I'm really glad I did. I do have one problem, though, with your podcast. Okay. You don't have enough episodes. I think I've gone through and watched almost every one. Just the amount of detail and the small things you learn. I can't even think of one individually. There's just been so many small things that you really would not pick up anywhere else if you're reading about the FA-18 here or different weapon systems there. There's so much. Like you had one on AIC picture calls.
Yeah, air intercept communications, and then we did a bonus on YouTube for the different things you might see and what it would be called. That's right.
Just that amount of detail you're not going to find anywhere else. It really is a great podcast, and I'm really happy you came on.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think that's why it's resonated with people, because no one else was doing it quite like this. There were some other people out there doing shows, but they don't have the credibility of having done it. And the community, getting back to DCS, they want to know about it because they already have this realistic simulation. And so to hear about these things from someone who's done it, and all my guests who have done it, is just a godsend for them. And they're kind enough to go to our Patreon page and pay us back, if you will, and they gain access to exclusive content in doing so, but they're helping us out. So to your point, this isn't my primary gig, so I can't do it any more than I'm doing. It's already taking quite a bit of my time from the family, but it fills in gaps. Like when I get to a layover, instead of turning on the TV, I open up my podcast and see what needs worked on. So it is wonderful in that regard, and it's kept me involved with people. And the best part about it, Greg, also is the young man or woman who reaches out to me and says, I thought about doing this anyway, but because of your podcast, I sent in my application, or, and I hear back from them later, oh, I was accepted. Hey, I'm on my way to Pensacola. That gives me great joy. And it's just fun to share this because I realize just how lucky I was to have the life that I did.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, that's awesome. To be able to do something you love and also make a little bit of money at it. Be able to talk about that, and then hearing stories like that. So the Fighter Pilot Podcast, you can find it, probably anywhere you can find podcasts. I normally watch it on your YouTube channel, but that's just me.
YouTube, podcast, Apple Podcast rather, Stitcher, Spotify, it's there. And I will tell you, this isn't going to replace my airline job. I've been working at this for a couple of years now, and we only just this month finally paid off all my back debts for phone services and internet and everything else. And we're just starting to make a little bit now, and I plan to share that with the 8 volunteers who have come along to help me on this journey. It started with just me, a laptop, and 2 USB microphones, and now I've got a team of 8 other people helping me out. One's in Brussels, one's in Australia, one's in Boston, one's in Austin, and it's just really cool to have a group of guys that just really believe in it.
Wow. So definitely go check out that podcast. It's like I said, I know I might be being a little cliche or over the top, but it really is a great podcast. I really like it. So anything else you want to cover before we wrap up here? I know it's getting a little bit late. Yeah,
sorry to cut it short, but kids are going to bed here. And so, no, it's been a lot of fun just sitting hanging out with you guys. Next time we should do it in person with some refreshments, but I really appreciate you having me on.
That would be awesome. All right. Thank you. And that's about it for this episode. We'll see you next time. Tech Ops is owned and operated by hosts Eric M. and Greg R., along with producer Kyle Smith. Copyright 2019. Music by Kevin MacLeod, Twisted. Creative Commons 3.0.